All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And as people come in, I'll just admit them through. But my name is Shannon Osborne. I'm the Assistant Director for Financial Wellbeing in the Student Support and Advocacy Center. This is the salary negotiation session from Money Smart Day. So I'm super excited. Dorothy will be our presenter. She is from Career Services. And I'm so excited for this presentation because I think this is something Dorothy and I were talking about beforehand that's extremely helpful for students when they're graduating and just me in general. I think a lot of times even I lack the confidence for salary negotiation, so I'm super excited. So I will pass the baton to Dorothy to talk a little bit more about herself and get started. If you have any questions, type it in the chat. We will both monitor the chat and I'll let her know if there's anything in the chat question-wise to read out to her. But definitely, like I said, it's recording, so feel free to turn off your camera. And go ahead and mute your microphone so we can all listen to the awesome things that she's going to talk about. So I'll pass over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm really excited to be part of the Money Smart Day here at Mason. To tell you a little bit about myself, I work in University Career Services. And in my role, I am an industry advisor. So what that means is that I work with students generally after they have figured out what kind of industry area they may want to go into. I help them with strategy when it comes around employment, from the start of maybe working on, say, like a resume to the very end of the process, which may include salary negotiation. So salary negotiation is something that I'm very passionate about because I really do see it as not only being an important part of making sure that you're able to be your best self, but it's also important to make sure that we have those we have salaries that make sense and we can reduce any wage gaps. So in the chat, what I would love for you to do today is I definitely want this to be kind of conversational. If you have any questions, I want you to place those in the chat and I'll be sure to cover them as best I can. But for those of you that are attending right now, that are in here, I would like to see if you have an idea. So my first question for all of you is, which percentage represents the employers who expect candidates will negotiate? Is it 70% or 40%? Starting to see some answers come in, so be sure to place those in the chat. So the thing that I did not realize until I started to work and look at these numbers, look at the studies and information, I didn't realize that the correct answer here is 70%. So overwhelmingly, employers are expecting that candidates who they are making an offer to are going to want to negotiate. We're going to talk a little bit today about what that means. And we'll also be talking a little bit more about what you can do to negotiate. I think if I'd realized as I was an undergrad or even a grad student, just how common negotiation was, I would have made some different decisions as I applied to positions. So in terms of the people who actually negotiate, what we know is that 40% that we saw earlier, that's actually the number of people who negotiated for the job that they're currently in. We know that lower percentages of women and also minorities negotiate. And one of the things that we do in career services is we want to help reduce that gap in pay by talking more about the topic of salary negotiation. Salary negotiation is generally going to take place after as you have been extended the offer, you'll have an opportunity to either accept or reject an offer. The third option is to negotiate it. If an employer is extending an offer to you, that means that they have made a decision that they really like you and they want to have you on their team. they are prepared to stop their hiring process completely to be able to hire you. So I want you to keep that in mind as we talk today. So with regard to negotiating, the average return is about 7.4%. So in terms of what that can mean, if you're given a salary of say 70,000, if we multiply that times 7.4%, that could mean that you end up with an additional $5,180. That ends up being about really close to $100 a week more that you would be able to take home. Another thing that I can show you is regarding that that gender gap, the wage gap that we see, is that with salary, if you are looking at this chart, it's a little bit hard to see, but of the dollar that a white male may make, you'll see the different numbers. So for a Hispanic or Latina woman, they may make about 54 cents on the dollar that a white male may make. So it really does matter over time. There are charts that you can look at that will show you the difference over time that someone can make, because what generally happens when you are accepting an offer and you work for a company, you may not get a raise until your first or second year in. And if you're staying with that company and you're getting a 2 or 3% pay raise, if you are trying to catch up with that person that has a 7% salary that's higher than you, that could mean that you're working for 3 years just to get where that person who negotiated got to in the process. So one of the things I know I would be asking myself if I were you is, where do I start if I need to, if I want to negotiate, how do I do this? And one of my favorite songs is by Beyonce. It's Formation. So one of the things that I like to think of is that negotiating begins with information. So if you are informed and you can also demonstrate to that employer that you know what your value is, you're going to be much more likely to get that salary that you deserve. So let's talk a little bit about that. So in terms of what you can expect is that in certain industry areas, the employer may want to discuss an offer with you. So they may say, for example, what would you like to make? What's your number? They may say things like that. They may ask you in the interview process, what would you like to make? If that happens, there are a few things that you can do in that moment to help your chances of getting a better idea. The first thing to consider is that if you're being asked in an interview what your salary number is, the interview, what that's really designed to be is it is an opportunity for you to get to know the employer and the roles and responsibilities of the job that you'd be doing. And it's also an opportunity for that employer to get to know you. So my first piece of advice is that you would respond by saying, I'd really like to get a better idea of what the role entails before I can discuss salary. Saying something like that is just going to give the employer an understanding that, you are engaged, but by not providing that number, you're able to keep your negotiating options open. You could also say something similar, like you'd want to get to know the roles and responsibilities first. And that's very important, because if you are looking at research, which we'll discuss in a few slides, if you're doing your research and you are finding that, say, the salary would be $75,000 to $80,000 based on the title, but then as you're looking at the responsibilities, you see that maybe, you know, it's really like 78 to 82,000. That's a pretty significant jump. But if you can justify the higher salary because you have a better understanding of roles and responsibilities, that's really going to help you in the negotiating process. The third thing that you could say is if this comes up and they're saying, you know, what's your number in the process, you can also say, you know, I'd really like to see if this is a fit for both of us before discussing salary. If none of these three things have stopped the conversation, then it may mean that you would need to talk about it, but it's very likely that if you went with one of these two, or even this third one where you're saying, you know, I'd really like to learn more before we discuss salary, get to know you a little bit more, it's very likely that they'll get the hint that, you know, you're not, at that point, you're not really ready to discuss the salary. The other thing that I want to make a special point about is you may see in the, you may be asked, what's your current salary? What do you currently make? Or what's your ideal salary? These both become very tricky questions, and they can act as a means to kind of get an idea of what number you'd want. If your number is too low and you don't know that it's too low, the employer could decide that they want to just give you that lower salary because you provide that number. So it's best before you do any discussion of salary, to do your research, and also don't share your ideal or your current salary with that employer. It just gives you more leverage. This is especially true for anyone who may be, you know, listening to this presentation today, who is, say, a mid-level person who is maybe earning a degree here at Mason as say like a transfer student. Say you've already got some experience. You may be in a position that has a lower salary because you're going to school. That's also a reason why it's just so much easier to not share that information if you don't have to. So those things that you can also be doing include getting prepared by understanding what those salary ranges look like. In my next few slides, I'll be talking about first some factors that you should consider, and then also some websites that you can use to find some salary ranges. In University Career Services, if you were to come to us and say, you know, I'd like to get some information about salary, we could also talk with you about how to find that information more specifically, or to help you to be confident in sharing that salary range with the employer. It's also helpful to understand if you're, say, given a $70,000 salary offer, that you not only want to understand those paid benefits that go along with the salary, but also the unpaid benefits. There's so much opportunity to negotiate, and I'll have an example a little bit later of some of the things that could be negotiated that you can consider. One thing that I found helpful once I realized that I could do some negotiation around salary, and something that I've recommended to other people to do, and if they found it really helpful, is to practice with a family member or a friend just how that conversation would go. So having the role play of seeing, if I say this to the employer, what might I expect them to say back in return? There are going to be a few factors that you'd want to consider. I've included several of them on the screen, but the salary may be dependent on a few things in particular. One of them that I want to point out is that supply and demand. So what we know right now is that the job market is pretty strong for both job seekers and for those who have openings. If you're in an area that has greater demand, it's likely that the employer is going to be more open to negotiating. In particular, if they've extended an offer to you, they're going to be much more likely to want to negotiate to get you into the position rather than have to go back to their applicant pool, do a second round of interviews, and then choose another candidate. So you can tell that it takes a lot of work to be able to make that additional hire or go back into the process. Once they've selected you, then they're counting on either an acceptance or a decline of the offer. When you're looking at what they may be looking at, geographic location is especially one of those. If the position is here in Northern Virginia, that's going, or in the DMV area, it's going to go at a higher rate than say for someone who is in, say, Central Virginia. Maybe they're near Harrisonburg as an example. Then the additional areas that may be helpful to kind of anticipate is to understand what is the experience level that you're bringing in, understanding how your experience maybe compares to someone else. The things that really I've highlighted in green and white here is, how do you perform in the interview? Are you a really, really engaging? Did you do a really good job? Did they really like you? That interview performance is going to potentially make a difference in the offer that they're providing. You won't know that as the person receiving the offer, but that's where negotiating becomes really important, and also understanding the value that you bring to the organization. So there are going to be plenty of places that you can go to do some salary research. Two of my favorites are Glassdoor and payscale.com. There's also a pay scale set of information from the Office of Personnel Management at opm.gov that I think can be also very helpful. Sometimes too, the employer will place salary information on their website. They may include it in a page that's for current employees, but as long as the current employee information isn't protected by a password, you can pretty much go and read into it as much as you want. That I usually find some really good stuff where, say, if an employer has a newsletter that they do for employees, and maybe they're talking about a recent pay raise or a bonus, I think that that can be really helpful to understand, well, how much of a bonus can I expect? I see that, this opportunity was out there, but I don't see in my offer that I'll be eligible for bonuses. Or it says I won't be eligible for bonuses until I'm 6 months into my role. Can I be immediately eligible for bonuses? Something like that could be negotiated and could result in you making more money. So there are a ton of things that can be negotiated. Everything from that base salary, which is just one of the things, from the cost that you'll pay. I know you have a great session coming up this afternoon. For those of you who are here now, there'll be a great session on insurance, but you could negotiate the price of that. You could also do some negotiating of bonuses, salary increases that can come in, tuition reimbursement. So if you wanted to go back to school, commuter benefits as well as telecommuting. We know that work is going to look different heading into the future. So having that information, professional, bless you, professional development opportunities as well. um, are going to be helpful as well, because if you were coming into a position, and whether you're new or you have some experience and you're looking to maybe take an advancing role in your career as well as a part of your time at Mason, professional development could be really helpful. Student loan payback is one that we're seeing more and more organizations are moving toward. Relocation costs is one that I wanted to make sure that I touched on. So if one of the things that I've negotiated and I've helped, well, I haven't negotiated it personally recently myself, but with students that I've worked with that say they're coming from, say they're moving from, say, Ashburn to Bethesda. So it's a pretty significant commute. So rather than commuting, they're going to be moving as part of being hired to work in Bethesda. One of the things that you can negotiate is the relocation cost. The nice thing about something like relocation costs or even the sign-on bonus is that those things can be a one-time payout to you. Versus if you say negotiate something like your base salary, or you negotiate a lowered premium that you're going to pay for insurance, that's something that would be recurring. So thinking about, what you would want to negotiate that would be recurring versus something that would be a one-time thing like a sign-on bonus or those relocation costs can really be helpful. So if I were in your shoes and you're getting an offer and they are asking you for, they're asking you, can you accept? Some may ask you to accept that day when they give you the offer. They say, would you like to accept the offer? If they do ask you if you'd like to accept, what I would recommend doing is saying something like this, thank you so much for this offer. I'm certainly interested in the company and interested in the position. Then say, I'd really like to come back to you in a few days. So then when you come back to them in that few days, after that few days has passed, you can use a line like this, which is, in the past few days, I've been thinking about the nature of the job and the responsibilities, thinking about my previous experiences. I think that my skills and experience would merit this range. So by giving them a range, you can basically put the ball in their court. Are they going to say, yes, we agree, that sounds reasonable? Or are they going to say, I'd like you to explain more, or just, no, that doesn't make sense? They have a few options there. But I think it's really important to know providing a range is very helpful because it can mean the difference. It can give them an understanding of what you're able to do. So providing that range, they may say, well, how did you get to that number? So if I say, after reviewing the information through Glassdoor, also seeing some information about initial starting salary of George Mason University students in this major, I believe that 75 to 80,000 would be an appropriate range for my role. That's going to give you more leverage. It's showing the employer that you've done your research, you're understanding what your worth is. They will have a few options where they can choose to counter your offer, or they can let you know, we really don't have the budget for that. I would recommend that likely they'll negotiate with you. And what you want to try to do is get to what's called your BANTA. And BANTA is best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So it's getting an idea of what your true number is, what you'd really like to get from that employer, having that in mind, but by giving them a range, having your number really fall somewhere in that range. So for example, if I'm given an offer of 72,000, actually I have an example. So if I'm given an offer of 70,000 per year, and I recognize that the salary range should be a little bit different. So if I recognize that the salary range really starts at 74, 70 to 74 is not a big range, but I'd really like to see myself get around that $76,000 range. What I might do is say, I think that the pay should be between 75 and 80,000. By doing that, you're much more likely to get closer to that $76,000 number. And when you think about what's the difference in pay is only about $2 an hour. For a majority of organizations, the price per hour, that annual salary, makes up such a little part of the cost of expenses that it really makes sense to negotiate, because it's really not a big extra expense to negotiate the salary for the employer. You could also be negotiating on other information too, in addition to this. So the information about, say commuting benefits, if you wanted to negotiate that, you could certainly see if that could be included as part of your onboarding. When you're having this conversation, I want you to be very comfortable with silence. So they may not say anything after you say, I believe that the best salary would be in a range from 75 to 80,000. Let that be the end of the sentence and give them the opportunity to respond. It's really okay for them to take a minute to collect their thoughts, because then they need to determine what's the best way forward for them. They may not be the person that can approve that that increase. That's also okay too. So if they can't, they say, I need to talk to my supervisor. I really don't know if I can do this. What that doesn't mean is that you've just lost the job. That basically means that they need to seek approval from someone else. So it's really okay if they say they need to seek approval or they need to talk to a supervisor before you can understand what their counter offer is. So when they do make a counter offer, you have two choices. You can choose to continue the negotiation. Actually, you have three choices. You can continue the negotiation, you can accept the offer, or you can decline the offer. It's really important, though, to remember that the employer who is willing to have that negotiation is also very interested in hiring you. Once you make a decision, you really have two key things that you can be doing. So if we are looking for that $76,000 number and say we get 77,000, we really like the position, it's a great fit for us, then what we would want to make sure of is, first, that we have that offer from the employer in writing. That way we not only have something that was told to us, but we also have it on paper, and we have signed and they have signed, and it's now an agreement on paper. Once you've committed to an employer that you're accepting their offer, then it's going to be really critical that you stop any other searches that you're doing or the interview process for any other employers, because what you have done is you've taken and you've accepted the offer. After you've finished that negotiation, you've signed off on your contracts and your forms, you also want to consider sending a thank you letter or an email to just express your appreciation to the people who interviewed you. Let them know that you appreciate their time and that you're excited to work with them. It's one of the best parts of the job search process is once you've accepted the offer, because you get to then begin to look at what you're going to do in that next step by accepting the offer, by being part of their company. Now you're a part of that organization and you're getting to know people. So I think that that's pretty exciting. Now, there may be situations that you encounter where, you just can't accept the offer that they've made to you. This could be because of the salary negotiation. Maybe it's not successful. You want to make sure that you are declining the offer, so letting them know that you've declined, politely doing so, and also by showing appreciation, you're much more likely to make a positive impact versus someone who may not take the time to say thank you. Employers and people remember that, even though we're in a really big ecosystem, networking and the number of connections people have between each other is really small. So making sure that you do your best to say thank you and show your appreciation is really going to help them out. If you do have that conversation on the phone, make sure that if you've had an email where you've been in contact, that you're going to go ahead and decline the offer in writing. So that could be an email. Is perfectly acceptable to say, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd really like to thank you for your time. Unfortunately, I'm going to need to decline the offer that you've provided to me, and leave it at that. Just making it really clear on what you are going to do if you're accepting or declining their offer. So those are all, that's a lot of what I had for my presentation. I do want to share that if you do have questions, you can always come visit us in Career Services. We have in-person times on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And all 5 days of the week, you can visit us by contacting us through our email or phone. So I'm going to stop my share, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dorothy, can you talk about the services for alumni too, especially with students graduating with Career Services and what you provide for alumni students?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So we offer our services to all students and alumni. So that means that if you are an alum who is 10 years out, just as much as someone who's 2 weeks out, we are here to assist you. So that could be all of this, that's all of the same services. So working on resumes, talking job strategy, doing mock interviews is another one that we work a lot with. Preparing for multiple offer situations, which is common, not something I included in the presentation, but generally all of our services that are available to students are also available to alumni.
And then there was a question in chat about the recording. So I just said we're going to put it on moneysmart.gmu.edu. Just give us some time because it's going to take a little bit of time to download everything and upload everything. I did have a question as well for you too, Dorothy, when you were explaining everything. The biggest thing I always wonder when I'm doing negotiations, there's a certain amount of time, like should I have them wait like a day or two until I let them know and follow up with them, or is it just kind of depend on the job? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's going to depend on what you find out about the industry. So if it's an industry that say moves really quickly or is, say, for example, sales based, I could think that if you're on the phone with them and they give you the salary, you could say at that point even, I'd really like to take some time and think about this. From what I've seen, the salary range would actually be this. Maybe I just don't have the complete information. So having that conversation initially could be really helpful, because what I've seen was, say something that has a component of sales, they may just have forgotten to give you the information, especially if they're talking to you over the phone. If you've never given an offer of employment to someone over the phone, you may be nervous about it too. So thinking about what that other person is kind of dealing with as they're giving you the offer, they may just forget that you have a $5,000 bonus that comes with signing on. And that's pretty critical to maybe know in that time. And I did see, I have a question that came in to me about can you negotiate part-time or on-campus jobs? I would say with on-campus, the salary, well, the per hour range is likely going to be set. So if that were like a work study position, for example, that budget may be set. You could talk with them. If it's negotiating the pay, that may be harder to do, but say they say it may be hours, you could be negotiating that potentially. So I would have a conversation with that supervisor who's looking to hire you. And for part-time off-campus jobs, it can still be possible to negotiate that a little bit with them. And I got another one. Should I negotiate salary for a government job? I've heard that there is little room to negotiate with the federal government. So that one can be a little bit of a tricky situation when it comes to the federal government. Typically, there are a number of there's a salary range that's used called a general schedule, and within a general schedule, you have 10 steps. So if they're offering you a GS6 step 1 versus a step 10, that could be, or step 9, that could be the difference in like $6,000 or $7,000. So it may be that they're authorized to go up to GS7. So just think, as the numbers get higher and the GS thing, that just means that you get more money from that federal salary. So I think it is possible to negotiate that salary. It may be that you're asking them to increase the step level, or if they can reevaluate, because it may be that when they were reviewing your resume and your qualifications, that they didn't have something that could have been calculated through the Office of Personnel Management's numbers. Would there ever, oh, go ahead.
I had a question myself. So, or maybe like a statement / question. So correct me if I'm wrong. If an employer tells you at the beginning it's non-negotiable, that's pretty much more obvious than at that point, like, before you even start interviewing. But I would say, like, if a government job doesn't say non-negotiable before you even interview, then anything potentially be negotiable. Is that kind of like a good rule of thumb, that like if they don't tell you that up front, then anything could be? Or would you say anything no matter what?
I would say that unless they're saying it's non-negotiable, that they can't negotiate, it may be that they can't negotiate on salary. So that's where thinking about those different benefits, you could be negotiating paid time off, which when I'm looking at say how much that equates to, I usually take the number 2080 and the salary. So if it's say 70,000 divided by 2080, that gets me the amount per hour that you would make. So if a leave day is 8 hours, you would take your salary your hourly rate, take your hourly rate, multiply that times 8, and it would be the amount of money that you would basically be taking in. So if you're trying to calculate, like, how much is this worth, salary may be the one that's harder to sometimes negotiate, if they say, oh, we're not open to negotiation, that may mean that they're really just not able to negotiate salary, because they may have, like we saw in the presentation, they may have a departmental limit on how much they can provide in terms of salary, but it may be that they can negotiate with you on workspace, or they can negotiate with you on additional paid leave that you could take. Also considering, when is your start date? So what I have seen an employer do is they'll say, we can't pay you more, but instead of maybe starting in June, so say your start date would be June 1st, you would officially start on June 1st, but you wouldn't work your first work day until July 1st. So that would basically be giving you that whole month of pay without you actually working there. That could be another way to negotiate it. Dennis, that's a great question. So about travel compensation, like mileage or MetroPass, those are things that are very common in this area as well. So asking those questions, I like to take a look when I'm working with someone on getting ready for a salary negotiation at the handbook. So there'll be a benefits handbook. It's really kind of dry, kind of boring, but it has some good information about what they offer. So if they're going to give you, say, $240 a month of commuter benefits, you know that right away. And if they don't offer it, you could ask if that would be a possible add-in. Because really, if it's a Metro Pass that you get, you get money automatically filled on it, or maybe they just give you the money outright, you could use it that way as well. So a good question came up too, I see. How do you negotiate the salary after being there for, say, 1 year? Should you negotiate by going to your manager or HR? I would probably look to see, I would probably talk to your supervisor first, your supervisor or manager, to see, I'm thinking that I would like to make a request to have a raise. I think I deserve a raise. So having that conversation with them first, they can give you an idea of what you would need to do, or what might be even possible to do. So before you have that conversation with them, I would make a list of the reasons that you deserve that raise in pay. It could be the responsibilities that you've taken on. It could be that you've been a high performer. So those things make you a better, they make you a stronger candidate for that raise. If they haven't given you one in the first year, then you could always ask them for it. But what you want to have is, you want to have your data ready to go to say, I've been able to meet my goals every month consistently. I've exceeded them by 20 to 30% during these quarters. I've had these customer service scores. So for those reasons, I think that I should get, a raise, and provide and let them talk to you. So by saying, I would like, here's my justification, I would like to request a raise. Let them respond to you, and then be listening to what they're telling you. If they're saying, like, I'd really like to get you a raise, or I'd really like to do that. If they can't do it right away, or they need to seek permission, keep track of that, so that if, say, they're not able to give you a raise because of, maybe it's because of COVID, that they're kind of trying to watch on salaries, go ahead and then ask them, well, I'd like to circle back to you, in June to have the conversation again. If they say, yeah, that's okay, then in June, you come back, you have your newly updated numbers, and you try again. What I have seen people do really well, so being someone who's working with not only students, but also with alumni, and alumni who've had some really significant experiences, been doing some really good things. I've talked to people who, just by having the conversation with their manager, the manager is then taking a note of that and saying, well, this person is coming to me, they understand the value of their work, I need to do something to make sure that I keep them here. Because that's also another option, and it's much more expensive to replace you than it is in terms of talent. It's much more expensive to replace that hire that they've done. They've trained you, you've been there a year, you're really already an asset to their team, to try to replace you at, say 16 months. And that means that they're going to have to rehire someone, have them there for 16 months in order to get that same level. So they're much more likely to work with you to get you that pay raise. Just having that conversation about the salary with the supervisor or with HR can oftentimes just make it a little bit easier, because they understand then that you're thinking about it, versus if you don't say anything at all and you wait for them to say something, they're probably not going to say anything to you, because it saves them money if you're not asking those questions. Any other questions coming up? Oh, good question. So I had one come to me privately. Is an offer in an email just as good as an offer printed on paper? So I would say that most likely, yes. Having that offer in email, the email can be printed onto paper, and more than likely to written offers that were provided in paper and say were mailed, or say they had you come in and then in person they gave you that offer, probably is about 10 to 20 years outdated. So most employers are going to, they're just going to email it to you, and then they'll have you electronically sign, or they'll have you print it, sign it, scan it, and send it back to them. So a question that came in, what does this exactly mean? X amount of dollars divided by HR plus applicable hourly health and welfare benefit. I'm not sure what that may mean. I don't think that was from my presentation, but to the person who sent that to me, if you want to send me some more information, I'll be happy to answer that.
Hi Dorothy, it's Vanessa. I was the one who sent it. It's just, I'm just saying, so like in like a contingent offer letter, if it says the compensation is like X amount of dollars per hour plus applicable hourly health and welfare benefit, what does that part mean?
Okay, so what that may mean, I would ask them for clarification, but I believe that what they're referring to is that they would be providing you with some kind of health care benefit, or it may be even like a life insurance benefit. So I would just clarify that with them, because it could mean a couple of different things.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Another question that came up, is it a good thing to apply for different jobs within the company, and how does that work? How does that look to your direct manager? So it may look a little bit different depending on the system, but from my knowledge, if you're applying to multiple positions at a company, say it's ABC company. So ABC company may have 16 departments. If you apply to 4 of those 16 departments, the other departments may not know that you've applied to those different positions. It may be someone in central human resources that can see that you've applied, but it may not be those individual managers. So the individual managers are more than likely not going to know, but it's likely that central human resources would know in that case. The employers don't really seem to care if you're applying to multiple positions within the company. The thing that I would caution against is if, say they're really different roles. So say you're applying to, say an engineering role for one, and then they have a culinary area and you're applying to the culinary area, that may be where it becomes kind of tricky. So I think it is a good thing to apply to those different jobs, especially if they're very similar, but they're maybe working with different departments. You're welcome. Any other questions? This has been really great. I love talking about this stuff because I had no idea before I started really understanding who negotiated how much people do and do not negotiate. I had no idea how much I was missing out as an employee, but then also for my fellow graduates. So I'm right now working on becoming a Mason alum. That's my goal for next year. So it's always exciting for me to be able to talk and have opportunities like this to connect with everyone. Yes, that's my goal, Michelle, future Mason alumni.
Well, Dorothy, thanks so much for presenting. That was awesome. I know I definitely learned a lot. And as she kind of mentioned at the end there, we have 3 more sessions throughout the day. So hopefully we're looking forward to seeing everybody at future sessions. But like I said, still check out moneysmart.gmu.edu for the recordings and presentations later. Just give us a little bit of time. Looks like we do have a question, so I'll let you look at that question.
So the question is it still taboo to talk about your salary range with other coworkers in order to renegotiate? I would say that unless the organization has a strict policy about sharing salary, then it's not confidential. So I think that you could discuss it. I would probably make sure that someone that you trust to have the conversation. If it's government, federal, state, or city, that information is potentially just public. So you could get that information if you really wanted it. Great questions today. All right, well, Shannon, I'll pass it back over to you. Oh, wait, oh, no, that's not a new question. Just scrolling.
Well, thanks everyone. Like I said,